In 1957, humanity did something it had never dared attempt before. For the first time, a living being left Earth and crossed the frontier into the unknown. There were no maps, no certainties, only a question that would change history forever. Is it possible to survive beyond our planet? That mission not only paved the way for space exploration, it marked the beginning of a new era, one where the sky was no longer the limit. At the heart of that history moment was Laika, the first living being to demonstrate that travel to the stars was possible. Laika was sent into space by the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, a period when space became the new symbolic battleground between superpowers. In October 1957, Sputnik 1 had already astonished the world by becoming the first artificial satellite in history, but for the Soviet government that wasn't enough. They needed something more impactful, something that would make it clear they could go further than any other nation. Thus, the Sputnik 2 project was born, a mission developed with extreme haste, under political pressure, and without the technology necessary to bring its occupant back. The official objective was to study whether a living being could survive launch and microgravity, but the real objective was to send a message to the world. The Soviet Union was prepared to cross boundaries that no one else dared to cross. Laika wasn't chosen for being special, but for being functional. In Soviet archives, she doesn't appear as a heroine, but as a test subject. She was a mixed-breed stray dog picked up from the streets of Moscow, where she had learned to survive the extreme cold, lack of food, and constant chaos. Soviet scientists believed that homeless dogs were more resilient than those bred in laboratories, less sensitive to confinement, and more tolerant of stress. Before becoming a global symbol, her real name was Kudryavka, although she was also registered as Sushka in internal documents. The name Laika was chosen later, intended for the public to sound approachable, almost affectionate, something that would mask the true hardship of the mission. Her training was long and progressively more extreme. Laika spent months confined in increasingly smaller cages, designed to simulate the cramped space of the Sputnik 2 capsule. She was subjected to constant noises mimicking the blast of launch, intense vibrations, and artificial G-forces that compressed her body for extended periods. She was also trained to eat special gels, as she couldn't eat normally in microgravity. Each stage of the training had a single objective: to test how much a living being could endure before breaking down. No point was a return to her practice, because such a return was not possible. Sputnik 2 was built hastily. It wasn't an advanced spacecraft. It was an improvised capsule designed to fulfill a political objective. It had no re-entry system, no parachute, no heat shield. Technically, from the moment it was approved, the mission was designed to end in the death of its occupant. On November 3, 1957, when the rocket lifted off from Baikonur, Laika became the first living being to leave Earth and orbit the planet. At that moment, humanity crossed a boundary it would never close again. During the first few minutes after launch, biometric sensors showed an extreme increase in Laika's heart rate. Her heart was beating several times faster than normal, a clear sign of the stress she was experiencing. As time passed, the data indicated that she managed to partially adapt to weightlessness. She floated inside the capsule, breathed, and responded to stimuli. For scientists, that was already a success. They had demonstrated that a living being could survive launch and remain conscious in orbit, but that success was short-lived. The Sputnik 2 thermal control system failed shortly afterward. Part of the insulation detached, causing the temperature inside the capsule to rise dangerously. The interior became an increasingly hot space with no possibility of escape. Laika had no way of regulating her body temperature or understanding what was happening. Within hours of launch, the sensor stopped sending signals. The mission had accomplished its objective, but the price had already been paid. For decades, the Soviet Union maintained a different version of events. They claimed that Laika had survived for several days in space and died peacefully when her oxygen ran out. This story was accepted by the world for years. It wasn't until the end of the 20th century that Soviet scientists admitted the truth. Laika died a few hours after launch due to extreme stress and overheating. This information was deliberately concealed to protect the image of the space program and avoid weakening its political impact. Sputnik 2 continued orbiting Earth for approximately 162 days. The capsule circled the planet for miles, passing over continents, oceans, and cities that celebrated the technological advancement, unaware of what had truly transpired. Finally, in 1958, the spacecraft re-entered the atmosphere and disintegrated. Laika's body was destroyed along with the capsule. There were no remains, no grave, no farewell. Only the record of a mission that changed history remained. Laika isn't traveling through space today, nor is she headed to a distant destination, but her place in history continues to orbit around humanity. Her mission ended decades ago, but what she represented lives on. Thanks to her, it was proven for the first time that a living being could withstand launch, wellness, and the actual experience of space. That information allowed humans a few years later to leave Earth and return alive. Every crew mission that followed relied, directly or indirectly, on that first step. Laika was unaware of the magnitude of her journey, but that doesn't diminish its importance. She was the first to go where no one had gone before, the first to cross the boundary between Earth and space, not as a victim, but as a beginning of something much greater. Today, every time a rocket launches, every time a spacecraft crosses Earth's orbit, that moment has its root in 1957. Laika didn't return, but she paved the way. And for that reason, her name doesn't belong to the past, but to the history of how humanity began to reach for the stars.